This video is brought to you by the statues on the central cathedral that once again decide not to exist in this episode. Make up your mind, A1. The first episode of Art Online Alicization second core has aired just a day ago, featuring a brand new opening and a brand new ending. The opening was so beautiful and filled with symbolism, I prioritized my Alicization opening 2 explained video over the episode explained, but now it's time to face the Integrity Knight in flames with our icy blue rose sword. Welcome everyone, this is Art Online Alicization Explained, featuring episode 14, The Crimson Knight. As always, timestamps to individual plot points are in the description as well as the pinned comment for easy navigation, but to give you a quick rundown, we got just minor dropped scenes in this episode here and there, mainly insight to Eugeo's thoughts overall, but to be frank, a lot of this was conveyed strongly in the opening already, which I recommend you watch my explained video on by clicking the icon on the upper right corner. But if you're new to my explained series, what I do here is essentially provide you all the vital information on characters, events, action, lore from the source material, light novels, things that the anime did not convey properly or just did not have the time to, so you can still see the full picture. But then again, if you want to read the books yourself for the amazing experience, Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links are in the description and the knowledge of Stacia awaits you there. Also, my Sword Art Online Volume 13 Alicization Dividing giveaway is over in less than a day, so this is your final chance to join up for a chance to win. But without further ado, this week we covered Volume 12 Alicization Rising, Chapter 8 Part 1 and 3 or 4 pages from Part 2, so it was pretty clear that we would get an overall solid and accurate episode since that amount of content does not require major cuts. But some little minor drops not surprisingly had to be made, one of which is right from the beginning of the episode. Chapter 8 of Alicization switches back to the point of view from Kirito to Eugeo once again, so once more, in these sections we get a whole lot more insight into Eugeo, and in fact, the chapter actually begins with a recap of events specifically from Eugeo's point of view. That's why I mentioned the opening at the beginning of my video, because there, Eugeo's inner conflicts were portrayed flawlessly, and this small recap was the start of that major conflict. In the past episodes, we always watched Eugeo following the steps of Kirito, seemingly not giving much of a thought as to what they had been through. However, in this inner monologue, Eugeo sounded extremely broken inside, evaluating all the information he had just processed. Back at the library, he had read a lot of history books while Colonel and Kirito were talking. In the books he had read, one key detail had stuck in his mind. Nobody in the entire recorded history of Underworld, literally nobody, had ever attempted to openly defy the Axiom Church or the gods it was supposed to represent. While Eugeo's faith in the church was growing weaker over time, he still believed in the gods to be righteous, and with his actions being the first ever person who defied the church, Eugeo considered himself to be the most sinful person that ever lived in the human empire. Eugeo knew at this point it was impossible to go back to his own life. Even if he managed to save Alice Zuberg, there was no way he would be able to live in the human empire as a wanted criminal. As he followed Kirito to the doorway Cardinal had created for them, there was one question he wanted to ask Kirito but couldn't get himself to. If I said I was going to the Dark Territory, would you come with me? Clearing his mind though, Eugeo followed Kirito into the armory on the 3rd floor. Seeing the vast amount of weapons and armor inside in the armory, Eugeo was actually thinking about how to find their weapons in the books, and it was actually Kirito who found their weapons in an instant. Kirito had simply assumed that their weapons had to be brought in recently, like 1 or 2 days ago when they arrived in the prison, so looking near the entrance would be the best idea, and he was correct, hence why their swords were actually quite easy to find. And upon this point in the video, the episode is about 95% accurate to the light novels, I'd say, which is why I love when they take their time to adapt things properly. I'll talk more about my opinions at the end of the video shortly, but the rest of the video for now, I'll just be explaining certain minute details, especially in the entire fight choreography, that simply doesn't translate well into the visual medium due to pacing issues, so things like inner monologues, decisions, justifications for certain actions, etc. So consider the rest of the video a deep dive into the entire fight scene, and if not every detail interests you, I recommend checking the timestamps in the pinned comment to see if any individual event of the fight actually interests you or maybe answers the questions you may have. So let's get to the fight. They grabbed the new uniforms instead of actual armor because they had never fought in armor before, which would be extremely disadvantageous in battles where they had to be comfortable to be effective. However, Eugeo realized it was a mistake the moment they opened the door to head out and got targeted by a barrage of arrows. The second volley of arrows they managed to dodge via Kirito's quick thinking. Eugeo was baffled by the fact that he had not even used a generate element command before using the burst element command, but he quickly realized they already had created luminous elements when they had entered the armory, and Kirito had just forced these to blow to create a shine of light, preventing the Crimson Knight in front of them, targeting them properly. Eugeo once again found himself appreciating his partner's quick reactions and instincts, just like he had always done back in Rulid, back in the End Mountains, back in Zakaria, at the Academy, and against Eldri. The light explosion coming from their back not affecting their eyes, but certainly blinding the knight for a brief moment that was looking towards the light, was their only opportunity to get close, since the same basic trick would not work twice on the experienced knight. So they lunged forward, however they were shocked by the actions of the blinded knight. He still hadn't recovered from his blindness, but he was keen on not letting the criminals get close to him. He brought about 3 dozen arrows from his quiver and readied his bow to shoot them all blindly to prevent them from getting close. Blind volley was obviously not accurate, but managed to stop the approach of Kirito and Eugeo, and while they were still in shock at the unexpected volley of arrows they luckily endured, the knight had already started chanting. Still slightly confused and relieved, Kirito was too late on grasping the circumstances. Well, he tried to guess what kind of sacred arts the knight was chanting, so he could conjure a counter spell. It actually dawned on him. The spell was actually taking too long, and the knight had not even generated any elements for a specific sacred art. If he had realized the lack of the element generation, they could have simply launched forward and probably would be able to reach him before the art was over, but it was already too late. The knight had reached the final command for perfect weapon control: enhance armament. It had been 2 years since the Crimson Knight had used the perfect weapon control of his conflagration bow, but now was the time again, against the criminals who he thought were using dark arts from the dark territory inside the holiest of places, the central cathedral of the Axiom Church. Eugeo tried to explain the situation, but the knight didn't care and charged his arrow. Assuming there was a charge time, however, Kirito had one single plan: take the blow of the first shot so Eugeo would close the distance and finish the fight. Unlike the showcase of the anime, Kirito was much more confident in the books. He was fully committed to his plan, so much so that he was already prepared for it even before telling the plan to his partner. In the anime, Kirito generates the elements when he was lunging forward, visible to the knight in front of him. However, his plan actually relied on surprising the knight as well, so in the novels, he had generated the elements behind his back while the knight was giving his speech. Eugeo had recognized the slight tint caused by the existence of the cryogenic elements and knew what Kirito was up to, as he silently lunged forward without a single shout up until it was time to counter the knight. Form element, shield shape, discharge. Seeing the shields generate in his path, the knight commanded his weapon to pierce the shields, and much like Eldri's frost scale whip turning into a snake, as if the weapon had its own mind, the flame arrow, listening to the commands of its wielder, turned into a phoenix, the original form before it became the conflagration bow, blowing through the final shield. However, Kirito had one final trick, a trick he had used back in Aincrad, which was omitted from the anime episode from season 1 as well. Spinning shield, a skill he had used to block the frost breath attack on Zirfan the White Worm on floor 55 to protect Lisbeth. However, unlike that day, it was not strong enough to stand against the flaming monster, as he got blasted to the far wall, commanding Eugeo to keep going through the cover of the smoke. And Eugeo followed that instruction, rushed the knight and barely managed to slice his chest with the first hit of his 2 combo skill, Vertical Arc. However, Eugeo realized the impending loss. His second hit would not be enough to finish off the knight, and he would be stuck in the post-skill cooldown, a paralyzed target for the knight to take out with ease. But Kirito taught him a special technique of the Aincrad style a while back. Eugeo put all of his strength to change the final trajectory with one single purpose: to ensure Vertical Arc would end where the one-hit sword skill Slant began. A technique so hard to pull off that even Kirito only managed to do it half the time he attempted it. A technique called Skill Connect. All of which was actually omitted from the anime, but yeah, Eugeo used the system exploit that we know all the way from the first season to defeat the Crimson Knight. Now, the anime does not make it very clear, but actually still showcases that the knight kept attempting to fight to a certain extent after being frozen. He would naturally do it right after healing himself, so he gauged his situation to start the sacred arts, but promptly gave up seeing his hands were frozen. To use sacred arts, you needed to generate elements that you could attach to your fingers, and with his hands frozen in a fist, there simply was no way to continue, so essentially he had to give up. And well, the rest of the episode is more or less even more accurate than the already fairly accurate fight choreography itself, with the knight introducing himself as Düsselbert Synthesis 7, the same knight who arrested Alice and got promoted right after, Eugeo's anger, Düsselbert's memory loss, etc. Chances are watching the episode would be even more efficient than me explaining bits and pieces here. If you have questions about the scene, sure, do ask away and I can clarify things for you, but there is not much I can actually add to these scenes by talking over here in the video. They are pretty much word for word adaptation of the novels, impressively so by the way, and I totally love the fact that they decided to go that way. One thing I want to address, however, something that we talked in my Discord server with some people, link in the description to the server of course, is the calm way that Düsselbert takes the truth. Some people believe he was being, too calm. However, you need to keep in mind that every person, even in reality, reacts to certain types of shock a different way. A showman like the young Eldri, for example, had less tolerance towards shock, breaking quite fast in the wake of the news. But here we are seeing one of the oldest Integrity Knights got synthesized when he was old enough to be married to someone, and on top of that real life experience, he lived multiple decades as a knight as number 7. On top of his complete experience, Düsselbert was also always showcased with a more focused and calm mind. And that is a sign for the future as well. Not every Integrity Knight is oblivious to the fact that they may be living a lie, and Düsselbert's reaction is definitely a sign of this. Sure, he was surprised by the revelation, however, it was a truth that he knew deep down was real anyways, hence why he was just left there unsure of how to proceed after this fact, after living decades as an Integrity Knight with a forgotten past. But yeah, the episode wraps up with Eugeo sharing his perfect weapon control chant with Kirito, though to save his voice actor some effort, instead of reciting the spell, he decides to give Kirito the paper instead, that they actually did not take upstairs with them in the novels. And yeah, the deadly twins welcome them, Fizel and Linel, the Axiom Church sisters in training, who were curious about the invaders from the Dark Territory, as Kirito and Eugeo were advertised as from the top. And that brings us to the end of this video. When it comes to opinions though, this episode is solid, by far among the best episodes of Alicization Anime run so far. And would you look at that, when they don't try to adapt a farce amount like 80 pages into 20 minutes, they do actually come up with genuinely interesting and exciting episodes that also answer the questions of the viewers. I mean, let's be real, if there was a way to properly convey internal monologues during fight scenes without terribly hurting the pacing, I would not even need to come out with a video this week. This episode was incredibly accurate. And as I said last week, I enjoy making these videos a whole lot more if I can offer information that can enhance your viewing experience like this week, rather than episodes like episode 13, where I have to dedicate 20-25 minutes, the entire episode, to fundamental information that needed to exist in the anime in the first place. All in all, this week's episode, episode 13, is a 10 out of 10 for me, would stand in the middle of fire and ice again. But next episode is titled Night of the Blazing Sun, if we actually translate the end card from the episode, which is extremely accurate considering we will be seeing the Vice Commander of the Integrity Knights with her heaven-piercing blade. However, the official subtitles may lead you to believe that the title is The Relentless Knight, and well, people who actually know Japanese still are curious as to how you can come up with such a translation, but anyways, next week should be much more action-packed than this week. First off, we'll get to learn more about Fizel and Linel, who are on the cover of Volume 12 Alicization Rising along with Kirito, and as I said, we'll get to meet the Knight of the Blazing Sun, and its apprentices on the 50th floor of the central cathedral with all kinds of twists and shenanigans. But if you made it this far into the video and have no questions, do comment Phoenix of the Conflagration Bow to let me know. Final reminder that my V13 Alicization dividing giveaway is running out in less than a day, so this is your last chance to join. Also, if you want Statia's Blessing, Amazon and Book Depository links to Alicization novels are in the description. As always, like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more Alicization Explained, huge thanks to my patrons, make sure to check my opening 2 Explained if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you next time, stay cool.